He's already threatening to back out of the debate. I told you on yesterday's show that he was going to lower the expectations and spin it as though Kamala Harris is a world-class debater. Trump is already threatening to pull out. I told you this was going to happen. It's been several months since I talked about Project 2025, the plan drawn up by the Heritage Foundation for the Trump administration to, among other things, hit the ground running on day one by slashing the administrative state and destroying the civil service as we know it. There are several components to Project 2025. But believe me, the ultimate goal here is to make the federal government so small you can, as Grover Norquist famously said, drown it in a bathtub. To which I said to Grover, where do you think that water for your bathtub is coming from? The government. I was having a difficult time getting another show ready about Project 2025 because it's a massive document, and the media, as well as the Democratic National Committee at the convention last week, did a pretty good job covering it. So we all know the introduction for Project 2025 was written by none other than J.D. Vance. That would be J.D. Vance. Somebody's learning After Effects. That's me playing with J.D. Vance's face. The introduction for Project 2025 was written by J.D. Vance, the running mate of Donald Trump, who insists, I have no idea what Project 2025 is. The same way Trump claimed he had no idea who David Duke was back when the KKK leader endorsed him in 2016. I have no idea who the KKK is. I know my father marched with them. So how do you talk about 2025, Project 2025? It's difficult. But then I was reading about the Trump campaign, how Trump has installed his idiot daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, inside the Republican Party as co-chair. I've been reading about how Trump is turning the 2024 presidential campaign into what I call an old-fashioned mafia bust-out, where all the money donated to Donald Trump, his super PAC, and of course the Republican National Committee somehow finds its way into a collection of Trump family-owned LLCs that supposedly provide goods and services to his campaign, as well as hundreds of other down-ballot Republican candidates around the country. Last week, I told you about CNN's report on the Trump family earning tens of millions of dollars by overcharging people like Bernie Moreno, the Ohio Republican Senate candidate, for use of the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago so he could host two fundraisers. He spent probably $100,000 at Mar-a-Lago, and that goes right into Trump's pocket. So the more I look into the transfer of cash from Trump's Save America PAC into his own pocket, the more I begin to realize this is exactly what Project 2025 is. Okay? If you want to know what Project 2025 will do to our government, look no further than Trump's presidential campaign. I believe it's a dress rehearsal for Project 2025. Project 2025 would destroy not just our government, but our country. The good news, Trump's campaign is Project 2025, which means Washington will never get the chance to implement Project 2025 because the Project 2025 approach to management, or should I say petty crime, it's destroying any chances of Donald Trump ever winning in November. We are never going to see what Project 2025 looks like except by observing the Trump campaign. If you really want to understand the driving force behind 2025, you have to remember the federal budget for 2023 was a little more than $6 trillion. Republicans do not want to cut spending. They just don't want to contribute to that $6 trillion. They want you and me to pay taxes so they don't have to. What the Republicans want is to get their hands on that $6 trillion. And Project 2025 sets the table for them by leveling the administrative state, getting rid of all regulation, and destroying our civil service, replacing government employees with private contractors from McKinsey, Booz Allen, Halliburton, and hundreds of other contractors who insist they can perform government services more efficiently than government workers can. That's a lie. Anytime you turn government jobs over to a private contractor, they charge 3 times as much for work that turns out mediocre at best. So, on today's show, the Trump campaign as metaphor for Project 2025. We're not going to see Project 2025 implemented, at least within our government. It's being implemented right now within the Trump campaign. It's a mafia bust out. That's what I'm saying. This is the mop-up for August 27th, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode. That's the best way for me to remain in your feed. I talk about this all the time, but it's true. I want you to subscribe to my channel and my newsletter. And don't forget to hit the notifications bell so you're always, man, I'm sweating. So you're always in my feed. And if you want to help out, the best way is to share this episode. That is the only way to help. That's all you have to do. Copy the link to this episode, paste it into an email or a text message or on social media, and share. If you share it with one person, it just spreads exponentially. I've been watching this. I just need you, please, to share this episode with one person. If you would like a free transcript of today's episode, go to shopdavidfeldman.com. They're free thanks to listeners who purchase crap over at shopdavidfeldman.com, like my souvenir for the 2016, I'm going to be talking about 2016, my souvenir for the 2024 presidential election. It's the worst case scenario map, electoral map on a coffee mug. It shows you that Kamala Harris is going to win this thing. The worst she can possibly do is get 270 electoral votes, and that's all she needs. So you might want to go buy that, or you can get my Harvard mug. If you want people to think you went to Harvard, pick up a Harvard mug over at the David Feldman Show. It's misspelled. It's Harverd, but nobody's going to notice. And if you can't afford a Harvard mug, we're giving away free diplomas to Harvard over at Shop David Feldman. So go to shopdavidfeldman.com and get yourself a free transcript or a free Harvard diploma. Yeah, we misspelled Harvard, but it's still a Harvard degree, and you can hang it up in your office and people will think you're a spoiled, rich prick with not an original idea in your body, as all Harvard graduates except Ethan Hirschenfeld are. Are you subscribing to No Show? Ethan Hirschenfeld's fantastic show every night on YouTube at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Go subscribe to the No Show, Ethan Hirschenfeld's nightly podcasts. Well, the Harris campaign is outraising the Trump campaign, but the Trump campaign is still raking in plenty of cash, especially from big-time donors like Timothy Mellon, heir to the banking fortune, who just donated $50 million to a Trump super PAC. Think of where that money is needed. Wealthy Silicon Valley billionaire Peter Thiel, who admitted working to get Trump elected in 2016 was a huge mistake, he is suddenly pouring money into the Trump campaign now that Thiel's private equity buddy, J.D. Vance, is on the ticket. So Trump is raising money. The problem is nobody knows where it's going, or to be more accurate, nobody's willing to admit where it's going, but come on, all it takes is just a little imagination. So, like I said, Harris is also raising money, much more than Trump. The difference, Harris is spending her cash on winning in November. This is what I'm about to tell you is absolutely, okay. Again, Harris is spending all her money to win in November. But nobody, and I do mean nobody, can explain where all those Trump donations are ending up. After Trump loses in November, there is talk that Special Counsel Jack Smith will indict Trump for wire fraud. Because you cannot raise hundreds of millions of dollars over the internet for your Save America PAC, promising to use it to investigate voter fraud, and then not spending a penny on what you said it was for. More on that in a second. So one can only assume this election, at least in Trump's enfeebled mind, is a repeat of 2016, where he is raking in as much cash as he possibly can because he doesn't expect to win. It's a remake of the Mel Brooks comedy, The Producers. The entire campaign is pay to play, okay? Trump, 4 months ago, literally told oil executives during a meeting at Mar-a-Lago they should donate $1 billion to his campaign because he said it's an investment in their future. He told the oil executives that when he gets into the Oval Office, I'm going to reverse all of Joe Biden's executive orders that crack down on the fossil fuel industry. The Washington Post broke this story last spring. Of course, what Trump said to the oil executives is illegal. But everything Donald Trump does is illegal. The problem with prosecuting Trump is, where do you begin? So what he said to the oil executives, what he says to every Republican donor is, give me money, and when I'm in the Oval Office, you'll benefit. It's called pay to play. It's as old as America. Donate to my campaign, and I'll pay you back once I'm in office. But as Zero Mostel and the producers realized, hey, what if I don't win? What if I get them to pay, but I lose and never have to play? That's what Trump figured on in 2016. And then you saw the expression on his face and his family's face right after he won in 2016. This, I'm showing you a picture. This is the look on his entire family's face the night he won. Oh, no. The donors paid, and now I have to play. So, do I think Trump's planning to lose in 2024? No. But his plan B this time around is plan A back from 2016, which is, if I'm going to lose, pocket as much cash as I possibly can, which means stealing from Republicans. Literally stealing from Republicans. And that explains why nobody knows where the hundreds of millions of dollars of donations to Trump, to the Trump campaign, his super PACs, and the Republican Party co-chaired by Lara Trump, nobody knows where these donations are ending up. For example, during the second quarter of 2024, the Biden, now Harris campaign, spent 3 times as much as the Trump campaign did on political advertising. That's according to Juliana Glover, writing in Monday's New York Times. It's a great article in her piece entitled Republican Donors, Do You Know Where Your Money Goes? In this piece, Glover doesn't identify herself as a Republican, but she is a former advisor to Rudy Giuliani, Dick Cheney, Steve Forbes, and George W. Bush, all my favorite people. Glover in the Times pored over Trump's financial statements, which all campaigns must turn over to the FEC at the end of each quarter. She suggests that there's absolutely no accounting for where donations to Trump and the Republican Party, where Lara Trump is now co-chair, there's no accounting for where that money ends up. She writes about a growing network of LLCs and consultancies, many of which can be traced back to the Trump crime family. She didn't call it the Trump crime family, but this is a mafia bust out. There's a network of tiny shell corporations billing Trump's super PAC, his official campaign, and of course the Republican Party. They're billing all these organizations for goods and services, but nobody's quite sure what those goods and services actually are. Okay, Politico reported back in June that while Joe Biden was running neck and neck with Trump in campaign donations, Joe Biden and the Democrats were actually spending all their money in key battleground states, building out an infrastructure for what remains an impressive ground game for Kamala Harris to inherit. Joe Biden hired 1,000 employees to staff at least 200 campaign offices in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan alone. This is precisely how you win elections. But Trump's campaign back then was saying not to worry. Back in June, Trump's advisors told Politico they were running a much smarter ground game in the battleground states, one that they say is leaner and meaner than Biden's. They said campaigns aren't won by throwing money at the problem. Of course not. They're won throwing money at the Trump family. 6 weeks ago, when Trump was leading in the polls and it began to look like a red wave was coming, the Wall Street Journal profiled the Republican Party's so-called new and improved ground game. The Journal, it was a love letter to Chris LaCivita and the Trump campaign. They interviewed several key Trump advisors who boasted about how superior and well-oiled their get out the vote push is going to be starting after Labor Day. But the Wall Street Journal tried to find evidence of Trump's superior ground game, and they came up empty. They were only able to detect Biden field offices in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, while none for Donald Trump. And the reporter said, well, I guess they're doing it differently. Okay, it's the Wall Street Journal. They're not going to attack. Actually, the Wall Street Journal is pretty good. But this was praising the Trump's Get Out the Vote organization. But they said they're not using field offices and they haven't hired anybody. So if you read the article in the Journal, it's a celebration of how smart the Trump campaign's operation is, how they're not repeating the mistakes from 2020. But I reread it and I realized, wait, the writer can't find any evidence of a ground game and he thinks this is new and improved? Where could all that money be going in this new and improved 2024 Trump presidential campaign? Now, listeners, longtime listeners of the show, have heard me go on about the Save America PAC, a super PAC Trump set up immediately following the 2020 presidential election to prove election fraud. All the money he raised was supposed to go towards proving Joe Biden stole that election. But in the almost 4 years this super PAC has been in business, Donald Trump has raised hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars small donations from small-minded Republicans, and not a penny of that ever went in to investigating election fraud. Not a penny. Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, Sidney Powell, these were the lawyers who were supposedly hired by Trump to prove voter fraud. Well, they traveled all over America during the lead up to January 6th and after, trying desperately to prove election fraud in state houses and in more than 60 courtrooms. They failed everywhere they went. They lost every trial, and not one single Republican-controlled state house would overturn the election results. Trump never paid any of these lawyers. Not that they deserve to be paid, but they traveled on their own dime. Rudy Giuliani, in his bankruptcy trial, is claiming Trump still owes him millions of dollars for the work he did for the Save America PAC. The same goes with Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell, the other lawyers. They never got paid by Donald Trump's Save America PAC. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars raised. Where did it go? We know roughly $100 million of that money went towards Trump's legal expenses. But that still leaves hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars from the Save America Super PAC unaccounted for. Okay? And that doesn't include the disappearing millions donated to Trump's official campaign. There's the Super PAC, and then there's the official campaign. And nobody can account for that money. And nobody can account for the missing donations to the Republican Party, where Lara Trump, his idiot daughter-in-law, was installed this year as co-chair. Most, if not all that money is unaccounted for, and it doesn't look like any of it is being spent on a ground game or ad spending, which is how you win from the air. The ground game is knocking on doors, and you win from the air by ad spending. And ad spending appears to be sparse. Okay, I misspoke. I said none of it is going towards ad spending. That's not true. But in the second quarter of 2024, the Democrats were spending 3 times as much in key battleground states on ad spending than the Republicans. So a picture is slowly emerging, showing that while nobody's quite sure where the money donated to Trump ends up, one thing is certain. None of it ever went towards investigating voter fraud, and very little of it is getting spent on re-electing Donald Trump. They're spending some money. I'll talk about where that money ends up. Trump's campaign manager, Chris LaCivita, according to the Washington Post back in May, spoke before a crowd of rich donors at Mar-a-Lago, bragging how efficiently their contributions are going to be spent. He boasted, quote, "We're focused on quality over quantity." Yes, quality over quantity, because Trump only surrounds himself with quality people like Chris LaCivita, who in 2004 ran Swift Vote Veterans for Truth, which convinced enough voters that George W. Bush, a draft dodger who ended up AWOL from the Texas Air National Guard during the Vietnam War, he had a prouder military record than his opponent, Senator John Kerry, who actually served in Vietnam, earning a Silver Star, Bronze Star, and 3 Purple Hearts. Chris LaCivita invented swift voting. So by election day, Chris LaCivita, this turd, had convinced enough voters that John Kerry actually committed war crimes in Vietnam, and George W. Bush, who sat out Vietnam in the Champaign unit of the Texas Air National Guard and was AWOL, couldn't be found, he's a hero. Quality guy. Donald Trump, who served heroically on the home front during Vietnam by refusing to rent to black people, when Donald Trump discovered that Chris LaCivita was the quality guy who swift-boated John Kerry, Trump said, this is who I want running my campaign. These people are the worst of the worst. So the pro-business crowd of Republicans applauded Chris LaCivita's promise to spend their money wisely. They genuinely believed that because Trump is a successful businessman whose father literally taught him to count nails dropped on the ground at construction sites, they believed absolutely nothing. None of their money would go to waste. None of their money would go to waste. Yes, it would go to Donald Trump. Trump and his campaign manager, Chris LaCivita, are now raising boatloads, or should I say swift boatloads of cash, while assuring stupid rich Republicans that by giving to us, you get more bang for your buck, because unlike the Democrats, the Republican Party isn't shackled by layer upon layer of bureaucracy. And that's why I'm saying this morning, the Trump campaign is a metaphor, if not a preview, of Project 2025. Trump is running his campaign the same way he would run our government if he ever got his hands on it again. He's slashing costs, no unnecessary field offices, no unnecessary campaign staffers. That's Project 2025, or at least a huge part of it. If you want to know what government under Project 2025 would look like, pay attention to Trump's presidential campaign. Trump will turn our government into what he's turned the Republican Party into, a shell of its former self. The Trump campaign, and now because he's taking it over, the Republican Party is an exact replica of what our government would look like should Trump win and get to implement Project 2025. There's no difference. All the hiring would go to outside contractors based on the lie that corporations are way more efficient than government. It's a lie. They're not. Corporations cannot compete with the government. It's why President Obama had to ditch the public option with Obamacare, because the private health insurances complained will go out of business if the government offers public insurance. We can't compete with you. The post office used to offer checking and savings accounts for what are called the underbanked, especially in rural areas. But then the banking lobbyists got the post office out of the banking business because banks complained and said, we can't compete with the government. You know, the inefficient government that can't do anything right. So the banks said, we can't compete with the post office if they're going to do banking. And that is, so they stopped. The post office no longer does banking, which is why the Federal Reserve now reports 13% of adults in this country are underbanked. Even if they have a checking account, they still lack access to it. The post office is best equipped to fill that hole, but the banking lobbyists won't allow it because they can't compete with the government. Even though Republicans, when they win, slash budgets and install corporate-friendly bureaucrats like DeJoy, who's running the post office right now, I don't know why Joe Biden hasn't gotten rid of him. But even though when Republicans win, they begin to slash budgets and they try to destroy and or privatize government agencies, with all that, the post office, the Veterans Administration, our public schools still remain more efficient, more cost-effective than anything private corporations could ever deliver. That is a fact. Medicare and the VA are hundreds of times more efficient than the for-profit healthcare industry. Ask any veteran what they think of the VA and whether they want it to be privatized the way Trump tried, the way they say no, the same way seniors say hands off Medicare, hands off Social Security. Our veterans are saying get your filthy hands off the VA. That is a fact. That is the truth. That is the absolute truth. And if you don't know that, you're ignorant. You're not paying attention. Corporations cannot compete with the government, which is why you could almost call me a socialist, but I'm a big government liberal. I think that sounds better. Big government progressive Democrat. The truth doesn't matter. The truth about Project 2025 looting, busting out our government and taking all that money, the truth doesn't matter because this is one big mafia bust out of both our government and now, thanks to Trump, the Republican Party. You know, in the past, Republicans just looted our government. Trump changed the game. He's stealing from Republicans, stealing from the Republican Party, promising that if I get elected, then you get to steal from the government. But he's stealing from the Republican Party. This is, by its very definition, a mafia bust out. Mafia bust outs aren't supposed to be cost effective or efficient. It's all about transferring wealth from you to me, like the tax cut, Trump's tax cut in 2017, which he sold as trickle-down economics. He said, we're going to reduce taxes for the richest 1%, and supply-side economics dictates that that will balance the budget. We've heard that lie when Bush did it. We heard the lie when Reagan did it. And every time it increases the debt. Of course it does. If you give tax cuts to the wealthy, the government runs out of money, which is why Donald Trump racked up 1/3 of our national debt. $8 trillion in debt was racked up during the Trump administration because of the tax cuts and because he crapped the bed on COVID. But they all know this. The Republicans know that the government is $8 trillion in debt, mostly because of the tax cuts. They think that's great. That's $8 trillion that rich people got to keep. This is what Republicans do to government, and it's what Trump is doing to the Republican Party. It's my party, and I'll suck it dry if I want to. He is sucking the Republican Party dry. Trump's Republican Party and his own campaign are proudly outsourcing all the day-to-day operations of the campaign to outside contractors, to eliminate waste and redundancies that the government is lousy with. Who in the government makes more than $200,000 a year? I mean, Fauci made a lot, but nobody in the government makes the top level. I think the president makes $300,000. How can government be less efficient than Warner Discovery Channel that pays that guy, $60 billion a year? Again, we know how this all works. When Republicans get their hands on Washington, they start replacing government workers with outside contractors. We know how this works, and that is the core component of Project 2025. When you hire Dick Cheney's Halliburton or Eric Prince's Blackwater to fight wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, when you privatize the fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, when you privatize giving meals and housing to our soldiers, billions are wasted as Republican donors get richer and our soldiers go without, ending up dead because they lack the proper equipment and ammunition. That's another side of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq that we don't talk about or that we forgot. George W. Bush tried to privatize as much of that war as he possibly could. Eric Prince approached Donald Trump to privatize the war in Afghanistan, but the Joint Chiefs of Staff wouldn't allow it. He met with Trump and he said, why don't you just hire my new company? He changed the name of Blackwater. He said, why don't you just hire us and we'll fight the war in Afghanistan for you. These are the worst of the worst. The worst of the worst. When Booz Allen or McKinsey is hired by the government to do the work of civil servants, it's 3 times as expensive for a job that's 3 times as worse. But Republicans, especially the Heritage Foundation, the people behind Project 2025, they look at the federal government's $6 trillion a year budget. And just like Tony Soprano, all they think is, how can I get some of that? It's Davies Sporting Goods Store. It's a mafia bust out. You saw that episode in The Sopranos. That's what Republicans do to the federal government. They treat it like Davies Sporting Goods Store. Project 2025 says, fire the entire civil service, burn down the administrative state, and bring in outside contractors. And by outside contractors, they mean wealthy Republican donors. It's pay to play. And from what I'm reading, this is exactly how Republicans are also running the entire Trump campaign, or at least that's what I think. What I'm saying is something Chris LaCivita, the campaign manager, describes as lean and mean. But what it really is, what is it? It's a handful of top Trump advisors kicking as much back to Trump while privately keeping as much of the campaign donations for themselves so long as Trump doesn't find out about it. Look, Trump is going to lose because he figures money spent on his campaign is money that's not going directly into his pocket, unless money to get him elected goes towards a Mar-a-Lago fundraiser or a Trump family-owned LLC or a salary to his kids. Unless that money goes there, Trump wants all of it for himself. Back in May, Republicans in Arizona, Georgia, and Michigan complained to the Washington Post that it's too late in the game. And so far, they see no evidence of field offices or the hiring of any staffers. This was back in May. In May, right around the time Lara Trump, Donald's idiot daughter-in-law, right around the time she was installed as RNC co-chair, the Washington Post got their hands on the new RNC's plan for winning Georgia. The new plan, there's the new regime with Lara Trump as co-chair. The new plan promised to hire 12 regional directors and 40 field organizers in Georgia, with additional field officers to be brought in later in June. Right now, there's no evidence that any of that spending or hiring ever took place. Brian Kemp is the Republican governor of Georgia. Cody Hall, Governor Kemp's senior advisor, Republican, told the Post back in the spring, quote, now please listen to this. It's amazing. This is what a Republican is telling the Post, quote, in order to win close elections in Georgia, you have to have a ground game that emphasizes turning out early votes and absentee voters. I have seen no evidence of them having any of that. The Trump campaign has one consultant in Georgia, but there's nobody else that I can see. And everyone here in Georgia in the Republican Party is concerned, unquote. And that story is identical to the same story we're hearing in Arizona and Michigan. There are no field offices, no ground game. It's lean and mean. Money is being spent by Chris LaCivita in Arizona and Michigan, although the Michigan Republican Party is close to bankrupt. Nobody can tell you where it's being spent. Trump has one consultant in all of Georgia. Now, let's use our imagination. That consultant, I'm going to assume, is an outside contractor who has been given a budget. And if he spends any of it on getting Trump elected, then that comes out of that consultant's pocket. See, when you outsource, there's zero oversight, usually. You're handing money over to contractors who are financially incentivized not to spend any of that money you just gave them, because they begin to believe that if I spend the money you just gave me, it's coming out of my pocket. The minute you give a contractor, a consultant, money to do a job, they think all that money belongs to them. That's why Trump, from what we're hearing, has pretty much no ground game in Georgia, but he's spending money down there. I suspect, and I don't know for a fact, but this is conjecture, I suspect the money being spent down there is going to and through that one consultant. And I would venture to guess that consultant is somehow kicking most of what he's getting paid back up to a Trump-owned LLC that claims to be providing goods and services down in Georgia to the RNC. We're going to find out after Trump loses. We're going to find out where all this money went. In 2016, after Trump was nominated, he was obligated to organize a transition team in case he won. A president-elect cannot wait to start hiring right after Election Day because there are thousands of political appointments that must be made. And there's no time between Election Day and the inauguration to hire all these people. So the nominee of the Democratic Party, the nominee of the Republican Party is obligated legally to put money away after the convention to organize a transition team, to open an office, hire people whose job it is to hire people to work in the White House. And you have to get that going right after the convention. You're obligated. You have to be prepared for a possible victory. Trump put Chris Christie in charge of his 2016 transition team. Christie writes in his autobiography that 2 months before the election in 2016, Trump learned that tens of millions of dollars were coming out of the campaign for Christie's office and staffers who were preparing for the transition. Chris Christie writes that Trump got him on the phone and screamed, "Shut it all down," quote, "That's my money." And Christie shut it all down. That's my money. Trump literally said, the money you're spending on the transition team, that's my money. Trump views any money donated to his campaign as mine, mine, mine. The same way the people over at the Heritage Foundation who drafted Project 2025, the same way they view the federal government's $6 trillion annual budget as their money, right? Trump views the donations as their money. That's my money. The Project 2025, they say close down the civil service and replace all government workers with outside contractors who work for us, who work for our friends over at the Heritage Foundation. Juliana Glover, writing for the New York Times, it's a great story. Republican donors, do you know where your money goes? She tells a similar story to Chris Christie's, but her story is about this guy, Brad Parscale. Brad Parscale, and we've talked about him on this show, he served as Trump's, and it's a sad story. Brad Parscale served as Trump's campaign manager in 2020. He previously served as Trump's digital and media director in 2016. Donald Trump destroyed Parscale's life the same way he destroys everybody's life. He destroyed Parscale's life, but Parscale is back working for Trump because in the mafia, and I mean this is not a metaphor. This is the mob. In the mafia, they never let you out. You can't leave. Trump, this is what the mafia does, and this is what Trump does. He destroys your life, puts you in legal jeopardy, puts you in debt, and after that, you come back to him for protection. It's why everyone he screws over financially keeps coming back. Women he screws never come back, but the men he screws over financially always come back. He destroyed Rudy Giuliani. I mean, look at Rudy Giuliani. Trump owes Rudy millions of dollars, and Rudy's in bankruptcy court. But Rudy still comes crawling back to Donald Trump, hanging out in Mar-a-Lago, Bedminster, because he still thinks Donald Trump will protect him. This is mafia shit. Parscale had his own digital consultancy back in 2016. Parscale was brought on board the Trump campaign in 2016 as a paid contractor. In other words, he didn't work for the Republican Party or the Trump campaign. The work he performed in 2016 wasn't being done, as they say, in-house. It was being handed over to him, an outside contractor, and that outside contractor was Brad Parscale's media company. You know, much more efficient to get rid of all the redundancies. This is much better than the way the government operates. So in 2016, the Trump campaign paid Parscale a little under $100 million. You know, efficiency. All that money was supposed to be spent on producing commercials and then paid advertising on Facebook, Twitter, and Google. But Parscale didn't spend all $100 million. $100 million was his budget. But he's got to keep some of that for himself because that's how it works with contractors and consultants. You give them a set fee, they promise to deliver the project, and because they are allowed to keep whatever isn't spent, the thinking behind this goes, animal spirits take over, you know, they want to make money, and that incentivizes them to create efficiencies. And that's garbage. This is how Republicans sell privatizing Social Security, Medicare, the VA. They say, you know, greed, the animal spirits incentivize the people who are doing government jobs. If you privatize it, they're incentivized to create efficiencies. No, they're incentivized to spend as little as they possibly can to perform a government service so they can keep it for themselves. It's why most television sucks. I'm going to just tell you how television works to get you, like the water. There's E. coli in the water in parts of Great Britain because they privatized the public water. This is what happens. They cut corners. Okay, television. Let me explain to you how television works or used to work. The network, this is just theoretical. The network will give a producer, let's say, $1 million to produce one single episode of television. So the deal is, I'm the network, we bought your show, you're the producer, you deliver a finished product to us, the network, we're giving you $1 million, and you can keep whatever you don't spend. That's how television used to work, and still works in a way. And the network says, we don't care how you get the show produced. Just deliver a finished product to us. We're giving you $1 million. So the producer looks at that $1 million and thinks, how do I keep all of it? How do I deliver a show and keep as much of this $1 million as I possibly can? Well, I'll screw the unions, or I'll hire cheap writers, bad actors, maybe a director willing to cut corners. This is how Alec Baldwin ended up going on trial for murder. That movie, they had a budget, and everybody was trying to deliver the movie on the cheap, because if you don't hire if you get a cheap gun, what are they called? Armorer? If you get a cheap armorer who doesn't know what she's doing, you save money, and that goes into the producer's pocket. The network or the studio, they don't say, hey, we want an accounting of how you spent that $1 million. The producer just spends it any way they want, and that's why most television sucks. It's why so many movies suck. It's precisely why Alec Baldwin went on trial for manslaughter. They were producing Rust, and he was one of the producers. They were producing Rust on the cheap because there's a pool of money. And the less they spend of that money, the more they keep for themselves. Rust was a non-union set. Okay? Alec Baldwin is innocent, and he suffered enough. It's how the construction business works. Donald Trump, he's not a builder. Eric Trump says, I pour concrete. No, you don't. Trump hires contractors and subcontractors who bid for a contract. And they're given a flat fee to do something like lay the electrical wiring throughout the entire building. And Trump pays when he's paying. He usually doesn't pay, but theoretically, Trump pays the contractor a flat fee, and that contractor spends it any way he wants. And the contractor keeps or tries to keep as much of it as he possibly can by ripping off the workers. And of course, Trump, right? He lays in the electrical wire. Of course it's copper, Donald. Well, you want me to tear down all the walls now to prove to you that it's copper? Of course it's copper. Would I lie to you? That is the system here in America. A system where there's only one person in charge controlling all the money, and that one person cuts corners any way they can in order to keep most of that money for themselves. So anyway, back, how are we doing on time here? Okay, I'm going to try to come in an hour. So let me get back to Brad Parscale, because it's a very sad mafia tale. In Monday's piece for the Times, Glover, you should read this, Republican donors, do you know where your money goes? In this piece in the New York Times, Glover tells a story identical to Chris Christie's that he told in his autobiography. After the 2016 election, Trump learned that Brad Parscale, who was given $100 million to produce digital commercials and buy advertising on Facebook, Google, and Twitter, after the election, after Trump became president, Trump found out that Parscale purchased a $2.5 million home in Florida and was parking equally expensive cars in his garage. When Trump heard how rich Parscale got off the 2016 campaign, Trump screamed at the top of his lungs, "That's my money. That's my money." Glover writes in the New York Times, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, you should read the article, but she writes that Trump ordered Jared Kushner, this is, early 2017, he ordered Jared Kushner to literally take over Parscale's digital consulting business and make sure, moving forward, that the Trump family would get its cut of whatever Dan Parscale's business earned. So we gave you $100 million to produce digital advertising. You kept too much of that. It should have been kicked back to members of the Trump family. In other words, Dan Parscale was still allowed to work on Trump's reelection campaign, right? Trump was president in 2017. Now he's running for reelection. So Dan Parscale was told you can still work on the reelection campaign, but you have to kick money back to the Trump family. This is what a mafia move is. Jared Kushner says, you're making way too much money. We're taking over your business. You need to kick money up to us. After Trump became president, Parscale was put in charge of a super PAC. And Parscale made sure that super PAC paid Lara Trump, Donald's idiot daughter-in-law, Eric's wife, and that super PAC paid Kimberly Gargoyle, Donald Jr.'s fiancée. They both were paid $15,000 a month as consultants. Now, I don't know if I remember correctly. I don't know the exact number, but I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, Kimberly Gargoyle spoke on the Ellipse on January 6th. I think she was one of the opening acts. Rudy spoke, John Eastman spoke to warm up the crowd. I think, I have to double check. I'm gonna throw the dice here and gamble. I think Kimberly Gargoyle was paid $15,000, $20,000, $40,000 to speak on the Ellipse on January 6th. I'm almost positive, but I will correct myself if I'm wrong. And by the way, some of you have been complaining because I said Phil Donahue was fired from MSNBC because he opposed the invasion of Iraq. And apparently Keith Olbermann, for some reason after Phil Donahue died, from what I hear, trashed Phil Donahue and said he was fired from MSNBC because he was impossible to work with. Keith Olbermann is wrong. Phil Donahue was fired for opposing the war in Iraq. Here is the fact on this. Phil Donahue had the highest rated show on MSNBC before he was fired. Now, he was losing to CNN and Fox, but MSNBC was losing to CNN and Fox. But Phil Donahue compared to all the other shows on MSNBC, highest rated show on MSNBC. But he opposed the war in Iraq. He had Rosie O'Donnell on in the lead up to the illegal invasion, and she talked about what a liar Dick Cheney is, and Phil Donahue was fired by MS. They fired the host of their highest rated show because he opposed the invasion of Iraq. That is a fact. Don't get your information from Keith Olbermann. There's something wrong with him. Get your information from legitimate news sources. Don't get your information from me. Get it from the printed word. If you hear something in a podcast, and that's why I offer up transcripts to my show, accountability. If I get something wrong, I want it in writing for everybody to see. So, but don't get your information from things you see or hear. Get it from the printed page. I don't know why anybody would trash Phil Donahue after he died. I don't know what's up with Keith Olbermann, other than being a malignant narcissist. But he's good, and he's on the right side of history, usually. But you don't trash Phil Donahue. Shame on Keith Olbermann. Oh, okay. So this is why the show goes over, because I try to settle scores with people. I was talking about Brad Parscale, who became Trump. This is a sad story. He became Trump's campaign manager. Okay. It's sad. Some of you might remember Brad Parscale eventually became Trump's campaign manager for re-election in 2020. He rose despite the humiliation after 2016. They made him the campaign manager because he played ball. He was paying Kimberly Gargoyle and Laura Trump a salary, and he became campaign manager in up until July of 2020, I think. And then Trump humiliated him, clipped his wings, demoted him. That's what Trump does. Fires people. If he suspects you're making too much money, if he suspects you're getting better press than I am, he clips your wings. So in July of 2020, Brad Parscale was fired as Trump's campaign manager, humiliated. By early September of 2020, Dan Parscale was no longer working at all for Trump, right? It was a demotion, and then he walked away from the Trump campaign, and he mysteriously walked away from that digital consulting company he started. You know, the one that Jared Kushner and the Trump family took over back in 2017 after Trump discovered how rich Parscale became getting Trump elected president. By the end of September of 2020, losing his business and fired from the Trump reelection campaign, Parscale was arrested and hospitalized in a psych ward this is very sad, after his wife called Florida police complaining he was hitting her, she had bruises, and he was abusing alcohol. This is in the 911 call. And she said, my husband is holed up in that $2.5 million home. He's got firearms and he's threatening to kill himself. Everyone and everything Donald Trump touches. Police ended up seizing 10 weapons from Brad. What's his name? Did I call him Dan? It's Brad Parscale. Police seized 10 weapons from his home before locking him up and putting him in the psych ward. And his wife refused to press charges. Parscale later in the year turned on Trump. This was 2020, especially after January 6th. He said Trump was personally responsible for the death of Ashley Babbitt inside the Capitol that day. And Parscale said, I want nothing to do with Trump ever again. But as of May of this year, Brad Parscale, Trump's disgraced, broken campaign manager, is back working for the Trump campaign. No longer flying high as the campaign manager, Trump clipped those wings, demoted and humiliated him. He had to go into a psych ward. But he's back working for Trump because they all come back to Trump. This is the mafia. Now, in order to work for Trump, just to get in the door, in order to get in the door, you have to be damaged merchandise, or he won't hire you. I've done episodes just listing all the men who worked in the Trump White House arrested for domestic violence. If you want to get hired by Donald Trump, it's good to have been arrested for domestic violence. So what Trump does is he finds out how damaged you are, what your weakness is, and then he hires you and then damages you even more so nobody else will hire you. You work for me, you're going to have legal bills, you're going to maybe go to prison, you're going to be broke, you're going to, like Dan Parscale, Brad Parscale, end up in a psych ward threatening to kill yourself. So Parscale came back. As did Corey Lewandowski, Trump's very first campaign manager, who had to step aside after he was accused and caught on tape physically assaulting a female reporter for Breitbart. They didn't press charges. Florida police either arrested him or they were ready to arrest him, and then a phone call was made and Corey Lewandowski wasn't charged. This was during the 2016 presidential campaign. Corey Lewandowski has been accused of sexual harassment and sexual assault by several women, including the wife of a wealthy Republican donor. Let me just go full screen here, just because here we go. These are some headlines. Politico, Trump donor Corey Lewandowski made unwanted sexual advances. ABC News, singer Joy Villa says she wants justice to be served in sexual assault allegation against Corey Lewandowski. Politico again, Lewandowski cast out a Trump operation after allegations of unwanted sexual advances. New York Times, Corey Lewandowski, Donald Trump's campaign manager, is charged with battery. Just so you know, I'm not making this stuff up. Okay? In 2021, after reports emerged of Lewandowski's unwanted sexual advances towards the wife of a wealthy donor, South Dakota governor and dog murderer Kristi Noem announced that she would no longer require the services of Corey Lewandowski. Well, I assumed the services that Corey Lewandowski was providing to the South Dakota governor were for campaign consultations. But then Vanity Fair reported late last year that Corey Lewandowski and Governor Kristi Noem were carrying on a years-long affair, which the two of them deny. But news of that, the rumor of that affair, was just enough information Trump needed to invite Corey Lewandowski back into the family. And Corey Lewandowski, I read you the laundry list of allegations against him. Corey Lewandowski, like Parscale, is back again working for Trump's campaign. His wings clipped, no longer campaign manager, his reputation soiled, allegations of abusing women, allegations of adultery. He's going to work cheap, right? Who's going to hire him? Trump now finds Lewandowski a much easier underboss to control. This is how the mafia works. Paul Manafort, who also served as Donald Trump's campaign manager in 2016, later served 2 years in prison for, among other things, obstruction of justice, right? 2016, he's Donald Trump's campaign manager. By 2018, Trump is president. Paul Manafort is in prison. Thanks to COVID, Manafort was released and placed under house arrest when Trump pardoned him. Trump reportedly asked Paul Manafort to plan the 2024 Republican convention in Milwaukee. Now, Trump got pushback, and some people said it's not a good look to have somebody you pardoned, especially since you've just been convicted of, 34 criminal felonies. It may not be a good look for Paul Manafort to be running the convention. So Trump decided, okay, let's have Manafort remain in the background as a low-level consigliere. He'll no longer run the show. His wings are clipped. He's demoted. He's humiliated, indebted to his godfather for the pardon that he got. Perfectly malleable. Will do whatever for Don Trump. And then there's Steve Bannon, Trump's other campaign manager. The only one, the odious Kellyanne Conway, is the only campaign manager who didn't end up in trouble. But her life is a nightmare. Steve Bannon, campaign manager back in 2016. As much as Steve Bannon would like to help Trump in this campaign, serving as a capo or perhaps an associate, he can't, because Bannon got pinched. To his credit, he wouldn't squeal. They couldn't get Bannon to flip. And that's why Bannon is rotting inside a prison cell as we speak, after being found guilty of contempt of Congress. He wouldn't flip. He'll be out after the election, and Trump will reward Steve Bannon for not being a rat. Trump has no use for rats, except all the rats living inside Mar-a-Lago, Trump Tower, alongside all those bed bugs and cockroaches. Which brings us back to Trump's current campaign manager, Chris LaCivita. Nobody knows what the future holds for Chris LaCivita. But given Trump's track record with previous campaign managers, I think we all have a pretty rough idea of what's in store for Chris LaCivita. So I was thinking late last night about all the men whose lives were destroyed by Donald Trump and continue to be destroyed by Donald Trump. We all know when you get close to Trump, you're going to rack up millions in legal fees, end up either in jail, broke, or just plain broken. And yet, despite all this, men keep coming over to him. And they keep coming back to him after he's ruined their lives. Now, partly that's because he's a mobster. I would say 90% of this behavior is because this is how the mafia works. You can't leave. You get so damaged by the Don, nobody else wants you, so you come back with your tail between your legs and say, help me, help me, help me. That's 90% of it. But there's another explanation for all this self-destructive behavior that we see in all the men who are in Donald Trump's orbit. And that explanation is Donald Trump is Elizabeth Taylor. Donald Trump is Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was married 8 times. Elizabeth Taylor had 7 husbands. She was married 8 times. Richard Burton went back for seconds. Every single one of those men thought, this time it'll be different. Every single one of them thought, yeah, I know who she is and how all the other guys ended up, but I'm too smart to let that happen to me. Every single one of those men, except one, ended up with their hearts broken and deeply wounded, except for one of Elizabeth Taylor's husbands. That would be Mike Todd, who got out with his dignity still intact, but only because he died in a plane crash. Donald Trump is Elizabeth Taylor. He preys on the egos of weak men who convince themselves this time it's going to be different. And with Trump, it always is different the next time. Different. And by that I mean much, much worse. Right? The first time is a nightmare. The next time, you're in a psych ward. Donald Trump is not going to win on Election Day. He can't. We won't allow it. Because thanks to Project 2025, if he somehow becomes president, this time it will be different. And by different, I mean much, much worse. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you to Bob in the chat room, who keeps the conversation civil. Please comment on this episode. I don't know if I got the number right on Kimberly Gargoyle speaking at the January 6th rally, but I think I'll correct myself on that if I'm wrong. Please share this episode. That's the best way to help. I'm a broken record on this, but if you enjoyed any of this show, the way to help me is to share it. And please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And, of course, subscribe to my channel and my newsletter. If you would like a transcript of today's episode, please go to shopdavidfeldman.com. All the transcripts are free, and we're able to provide them for free because of my listeners who go to Shop David Feldman and buy garbage like this worst case scenario map. I actually like this. This is a coffee mug with the worst case scenario on November 5th. Harris gets 270. That's all she needs. Trump 268. I'm going to try to do as many shows as I can before Election Day. Some things are falling through the cracks. I'm doing phone banking tomorrow for John Tester. So I'll report back to you on how that went. I think that covers everything. Thank you all for listening to me. I will see you tomorrow.